There's a very simple truth that I think we have to accept rather sooner than later, and that is if we want to experience a new reality, we have to embody a new identity. And this can be seen from a very practical approach as well, because if we're not changing who we are, if we're not changing our actions, then the response that we're getting out of life as a result of cause and effect is not going to change at all. Things just don't change just because. Any sort of conscious change, anything that you want in reality, anything that you want to will into existence, it's not going to be done simply by imagining it being there. You know, Something that exists in your mind and your imagination, it doesn't exist for no reason, is what I like to think. But it existing in your imagination, you dreaming of it, is not enough to make it a reality. So the quickest way to change our lives is simply to assume the identity of the version of us that already has everything we want. And this is something that's talked about a lot when it comes to manifestation or the law of attraction or anything like that. But I want to take a very fundamental approach to it and see that it doesn't necessarily have to be anything too mystical, though it can be, but it really has more to do with how our actions are going to immediately influence the way that we're moving through life. And this is because there's two paths in reality: the one in which you do something and the one in which you don't do something, right? I mean, what else can there really be? If it's a question of stepping outside of your comfort zone, it's either you step out of the zone or you don't. If it's facing your fear, either you face that fear or you don't. So really, you're being shown that everything starts from an action. Everything begins with a decision. And the entire process, the entire equation of how you perceive yourself, how you regulate your emotions, even how you encounter with your thoughts, a lot of that is really a reflection of the actions that we're taking in reality. Because we're flowing in energy. And whenever we make a decision, we basically sign our energetic signature to that action and we push it out into the universe, into reality. And then whatever comes back is a result of that energetic signature. That's probably as mystical as I'll get, to be honest. But back to the main point, and that is, why do people feel such resentment for their stagnancy or their inability to change, for their inability to actually take action? Why does it build resentment? Why does it build anger? It's because you're resisting the natural flow of energy, the natural flow of things, the natural flow that you're seeking out of your life is in overcoming challenges, is in facing your fears. You restrict energy, you restrict the flow of consciousness when you feel the need and impulse to do something that, is exciting and fills you with a lot of passion. When you restrict your ability to do that, when you limit yourself through your own mind, that's when there's a problem. Because the problems don't arise as a result of sort of natural influence. Reality isn't necessarily stopping a lot of the things that we want in life. But more than anything else, it's us who limit our own selves, and we create our own box that we subjugate ourselves to. And the most important part of this episode, of this concept, is that how relentless can you be about staying in character? And someone might say, oh, I don't want to play character, I just want to be authentic. But who do you have to be authentic to? Who you were a year ago is different than who you are now. Who you were 5 years ago is different than who you are now. Who you were 10 years ago is different than who you are now. So which version of yourself do you truly owe any sort of loyalty to? And the answer is you don't owe loyalty to any version of yourself. You owe loyalty to the very awareness that you have that you are capable of changing your actions. That's what you owe loyalty to. Because who you are is a decision that you make every single day. And until you realize that, you won't even be able to change your sense of identity and your state of being. And that's where all change in reality stems from. All limiting beliefs, all fears, all anxieties, a lot of that has to do with our self-perception. And we can only change our self-perception by realizing that we are the ones creating it. Even if you grew up with other people telling you you are a certain way, even if your environment led you to believe that you are a certain way, it doesn't mean you are. It means you chose to believe that. And whether you did that consciously or unconsciously doesn't make it less true. Here's an interesting example. A lot of people will say, you know, I'm not the most extroverted person, but I can be. And to that, I'll say, prove it. Prove you can be. Or to someone who says, I'm not the most quiet and peaceful and reserved person, but I can be if I want to. And to that, I would say, prove it. Not because you need to change who you are completely, but because you will see that just because acting in a different way feels awkward, just because it feels tense, doesn't mean it's wrong. And that acting in the way you are now, playing the character that you've been playing for many years, only feels right because you've been doing it for so long. The brain prefers familiarity over evolution. And that's when your conscious awareness needs to come into play. That's when you, being able to see things objectively, being able to see things from a more neutral perspective that isn't so embedded in emotion, you can now say, I can choose to be the person I want. And anyone that has ever made anything of their lives had to make a choice to act in a certain way. Before you are qualified to do something, you have to act as if you're qualified, get into that position, and then through learning the actions, through figuring it out, you become qualified. That's it. The whole thing is like an illusion. It's it's a box of ideas that are meant to keep you out. This is why people who change, they're not going around telling everybody, you have a choice, you have a choice. Sometimes they do to guide others, but most of the time they look at it as a sort of hidden kept secret. The fact that, oh, wait a minute, I can just wake up tomorrow and act like a different person. No one will know. If no one knew you before, they definitely won't realize. And even those who do know you now, it'll probably take a while for them to start to build this new idea of you in their minds. Because everyone has a different idea of you. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You should act in the way that is going to attract and create circumstances for what you want in your life. If you're an introverted person and you believe that being more extroverted is going to help improve your life, then what is the path in front of you? What's standing in your way? Whatever answer it may be, it's either going to be something and some sort of sense of self that you're creating from what you learned about you in the past, or it's going to be fear, anxiety, and discomfort that's standing in your way. It's not going to be life that's standing in your way. Nobody told you that you are destined to be an introvert. And I'm not saying being extroverted is a sign of, evolution or is a better thing to do. I'm not saying that. And I'll flip the script in a second. But if you were introverted and you believe that embodying more extroverted qualities is something that's going to improve your life, test it, prove it. Be more extroverted and see all that stands in your way. And anything that stands in your way, there's your curriculum. There's your lesson. Those are all the teachers that you've been turning a blind eye to. All the fears and anxieties that you didn't really know too well, but you know that you really didn't want to go through them. It was easier to be introverted. It was easier to not talk as much. It was easier to not put yourself out there. It's more comfortable. And so the brain starts to create that familiarity around being this type of person. And again, I must repeat, I'm not saying that it's better to be extroverted, but if you are an introvert, if you do spend too much time alone, if you do feel lonely, then the only way out is to shift who you are. And by shifting who you are, you shift your life into a different direction. You have a choice. And until you realize you have a choice, you're going to blame your self-inflicted inner misery on the outside world. And this can go opposite as well. If we find that, we're too enthusiastic, we're too out there, we have a hard time detaching and keeping our center of balance, then we should shift our sense of identity from being someone who is very, you know, excited all the time, someone who is very over the top. We can shift that into someone who is more collected, someone who is more balanced, someone who's more calm. And we don't have to swing completely in either extreme. But whatever qualities we believe are going to make our life a better experience for us, we need to be willing to try them. We need to be willing to play the character of whoever embodies those qualities. And more important than anything else is going to be whatever stands in your way. Because whatever stands in your way is going to basically lead you to your rebirth. Any obstacle you face as a result of trying to change your sense of self and your identity, it's not an obstacle. It's the very thing you've been looking for. in moving through that, in moving through that discomfort, in moving through whatever is resisting you from becoming that version of yourself, that is literally the very key to unlocking the life you want. And another common thing that I see, all too common, is that when people start to try to shift their sense of self, try to shift their identity, they run into a wall of inaction because all the actions that they're taking thus far are actually just a result of inner change. So they believe they're walking with a different confidence. And this is all good. We should believe that we're walking with a different confidence. We should believe that we're now walking in a way in which our life is reflecting our newfound empowered state, our more present state, our more calm state, whatever it may be. But nothing is ever going to replace the very need for taking action. You can't move around stepping out of your comfort zone. And this is what we think we can do. We think we can take the easier version of any struggle that we have. So if leaving our comfort zone means, going on a big roller coaster, obviously this is completely an analogy. This roller coasters literally have nothing to do with it. It's honestly not a great example practically, but I don't want to hone in too much. But just look at it from the terms of a perspective in small versus large obstacles. If what we need to do is go on the big roller coaster because that's what we're afraid to do, we can't just go on the small roller coaster a bunch of times to delete the fear that we have of the big roller coaster. Does that make sense? So we can't step out of our comfort zone a little bit 10 times and expect that to yield the same results as stepping out of our comfort zone in a big way. Of course, we should do the little ones, but what we don't realize is when we conquer the big thing, the little ones become basically non-existent. There's no resistance to them anymore at all. And this is how we can change our life. This is how we can influence our reality through actions. Life is set up in a certain way. There are certain actions that lead to certain results that you can do. There's a spectrum of easy choices, easy actions, and difficult choices and difficult actions. And the difficult ones almost always lead to the better results. If you can imagine a graph, you can almost imagine the more difficult the obstacle, the greater the reward. There's a very famous saying, I'm sure you guys have seen this quote on Facebook, Instagram, wherever else, that something along the lines, don't quote me, that the pathway to heaven often feels like hell, and the pathway to hell often feels like heaven. And that couldn't be a better analogy for if we actually want to shift our life. And this is how everything works. This is how everything works. That's why the best teacher, the greatest schooling, the greatest lessons are always going to be you. In what you learn from changing yourself, in what you learn from transforming yourself, you learn about how the world works too. In going through that beating heart and going through those nerves and stepping out of your comfort zone, facing your fears to implement that new identity, because the new you does that. The new you doesn't cower away when those fears pop up. The new you doesn't stay in their comfort zone. And now I want you to think about all the things that the new you has. It doesn't have to be material. It could be anything. What does the new you have? And how did they get it? And don't be exact. So if you're saying, the new me has a really profound sense of presence and confidence, don't say because they did this, this, and this, but be more general. Be like, because the new me never shies away from fear. The new me doesn't let discomfort hold them hostage. The new me walks with confidence. The new me talks with a stranger if they want to engage. The new me doesn't dim their light when they walk into a room. And you have to do whatever you can to affirm this identity to your mind. And how do we do that? Actions. Actions. We cannot bypass the hard groundwork, the muddy work. That's what's going to actually get you results. Everything you fear, it feels like there's like a track of mud that you have to go through. There's so much resistance. It's almost like there's a wall of energy that's holding you back from doing those things. That's what you actually have to do. People will say, be like water, go with the flow. But water is relentless. Water moves and it doesn't let anything get in its way. Eventually, water cuts rock, not because it's strength, not because it's sharp or because it's quick, but because of its persistence. And this is the same way we go about living our life. If we just go with the flow, we're only ever going to accept less because we never had a say in the matter. If we only ever accept what is given to us, like a deal, reality says, here, you could take this if you want. And if we always accept it because we're glad to just have anything, then we're saying so much about our state of being. But if we say relentlessly, I will not accept less. I will not accept less. I'll leave my comfort zone as many times as I need to. I'll face my fears as many times as I need to. Because I know for a fact, if I do it enough times, I will get what I want. Again, this doesn't have to do anything with materialism. It can, but it doesn't have to, and it doesn't really. It's more emotional freedom, emotional regulation, enjoyment of life. Because what matters more than that? And we feel a sense of purpose in changing our state of being. Because when we change our state of being, suddenly there's opportunities everywhere. When you go about your life thinking, how can I use this to cement this new identity to my brain? Suddenly there's portals everywhere for you to do that. There's upgrades available literally everywhere. Talking to the barista at a coffee shop, that's an upgrade. That's something the new you would do. That's not something the old you would do. That's not something the old you would do. I'm using an example, obviously. I'm not making a claim about whoever's listening. But there are opportunities all around you. And all you have to do is realize that you do have a choice. When you turn around, instead of facing that fear, that was a choice. You can make any excuses you want. You can make any logical reasons for why you didn't do it, but the brain doesn't listen to logic. It listens to proof. The brain listens to proof of concept, and that concept is who you are. Don't wait for your brain to tell you the kind of person you are. Tell your brain who you are, and it will listen. It may take some time for it to adjust, but it will listen because it's always looked to you for direction. So even the way it acts now is a result of observing you through all these years. That's why it acts the way it does. And if you want it to act differently, show it a different proof of concept. The change doesn't exist unless the brain can see it through your eyes, unless it can hear it through your ears, and unless it can feel it through your nervous system. The change is in reality. You have to dance and move with reality. Get out of the inner world. Get out of the inner change. Get out of the inner chess match with your inner voice. Get out of there and go into the external world because that will yield you results significantly quicker. Not just quicker, your inner world and what you do within is reserved for a very specific reason. It's reserved for healing. It's reserved for reflection. It's not going to actually yield you or give you anything. If you feel miserable right now, if you think you're suffering because you're so stagnant, because you're a version of yourself you're not happy with, you need to move and engage with the equations of reality. And the equations are simple. Do as you wish to be, and that you will become. It's that simple. Simple, but difficult. I know, it is. But look for every little opportunity that the universe is basically handing you on a silver platter to prove who you really are. Because once you set the intention, it is seen. The intention that you give out is observed. And notice, write it down. Say, from this point on, I am a different version of myself. And look at all the opportunities fall into your lap. They're not going to be easy. They're going to be extremely difficult to actually seize those opportunities and walk through those doorways. But you can't say the opportunities were not provided for you. And it might take 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 50 times, whatever it may be. However many times it takes for you to really start seeing a crazy difference in your life, because that's what's going to happen. You don't doubt that what I'm saying is even remotely correct. You're probably doubting your ability to actually do what I'm saying. And that's a huge fundamental difference. So don't trust yourself. Trust the truth of it. Trust the process. Just surrender to it. Surrender to the fact that if I just go out of my comfort zone, if I face my fears, if I act like the version of me I've always wanted to become, I will be them. Surrender to that. Believe in that. And you will learn to believe in yourself as well. That's it for this episode, guys. I'm going to link my book down in the description if you guys want to check it out. It's available on my website or Amazon. It goes into more stuff like this. But if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe as always. If you're listening on Spotify, thank you. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.